In this video, we're going to continue on looking at learning about UVs inside of Maya, and this time we're going to be using our character model to take a look at a few different ways to texture. So in the last video, we took a look at the planar mapping, and we used the fish model to do that. There are a few other pieces on here that I think could work pretty well with the planar mapping. So we've got this loincloth piece here, and if we open up the UV texture window on this, we can go to Window, UV Texture Editor, right there, and we can take a look at what we've got. I'll just tap F to frame the whole thing, and it looks somewhat good because there's some automatic UVs that are created whenever we create a polygon plane, but you can see there's a big face in the back here, and it's kind of mapped up here. So the thing is messed up just a little bit. We'll just select the object and we'll use the same tool that we were looking at before. We're going to go to polygons. We're going to go to create UVs and do planar mapping. This time we're going to do the option box, and this time instead of projecting from the x-axis, remember the fish was kind of flat this way and his body ran down this direction, we need that polyplane to push straight through in this direction, which is the not the x-axis, the z-axis. So let's put this on z-axis and hit project, and you can see it's going to give us this. We've already looked at the manipulator and how we can kind of move things around. We can click on this, we can scale, we can rotate, and everything that we're used to doing, we've got those tools handy to us with this projection here. Even if we click off and you hit the object, as long as you don't delete history, you should be able to get to that projection node and through here. It is possible that you can also do numeric values for this, so if you wanted absolute values for things, like if you wanted 40/40, or if you wanted to make that smaller, we could do 50 and 50 for the projection width on here. So the other thing that we looked at, if we grab our UVs on here, we looked at this unfold tool, or the smooth UV tool. If you go in here, we can do the unfold and click and drag, and that's one way of doing it. The other tool that they have in here that they've added, I'm just tap Q to get out of that tool, is this tool right here, the unfold selected UVs, and this is more of an automatic process, and you can see it just unfolds it pretty quickly. Now it did kind of rotate the model, and we can just kind of take this and rotate this thing back. So while I'm working on a bunch of different UV pieces, I like to just take this and move this outside of the 0 to 1 space. I just know that I've mapped this thing, I'm done with it, but when we get done mapping all of our different objects, we're going to have to go through a process where we fit everything onto this page that you see here. Alright, another area that we'll take a look at real quickly for planar mapping, it might not be so obvious because this thing isn't quite so flat, is the top shoulder piece thing that we have here. So we're going to go back to that tool. We're going to go to planar mapping and go to the top, and this time we're going to project it from the y-axis. So you can see y runs up and down, and then we'll just project it from the top. So we'll hit apply like this, and you can see with those tools that we've turned on before, we can turn on our UV texture border, and we can also have this color coding thing to let us know if it's red, it's we've got things facing the wrong direction, and you can tell right now it's overlapping. That's to be expected because we're just taking this planar map and then just pushing it straight through the object. So now we got to do some work to get this thing cut apart. So I'm going to hit F8 real quick and then just hit Shift I to do the isolate select, which sits here. So we're going to view selected. So we're only worrying about this thing right now. And I'll hit F10 for my edges, where I can right click here and say edge. Let's double click these edges around here, hold down Shift and keep double clicking to work our way around the model. And again, we're going to use the cut tool, and we're just going to slice through the model. So we've got some edges, I'm going to tap 4, that are not wanted here. I'm going to hold down Control and just drag a marquee on them to deselect them. I just want to get that bottom piece cut away for now. Okay, so we just might have to check this from a couple different angles. Tap 5, and it looks like we should be good to go. I'm going to just make sure I don't have any of these corner pieces. I'll leave some of them just to show you kind of what happens if we don't get that cleaned up. So we're going to cut this right there like that. I'm going to turn this thing back on. Now we can see our texture borders like this. we looked at this tool where we can just click on one UV for the shell and it'll move the entire thing. So now here we have this bottom piece that's separated like this. So I'm going to drag a marquee around this section. I'll tap Q to get out of this tool. Any of these tools, it seems like to get out of them you have to hit Q or some move tool or something like that. I always just tap Q to get out of them. And it seems a little annoying, but that's just something you got to hit. So you can see this thing's red. It's not going the right direction, so we can just flip it horizontal like that, and then it'll turn blue, and then now we know that we're facing the right direction for this. And then now we've got this big giant kind of shell thing going on here. Now we've looked at cutting, but we've never looked at sewing some edges. So if we take this edge, you can see it's cut here. If I tap F in here, we can see exactly where this thing is. So you select an edge, you can do it here or here, and if you click this little button, that's actually going to sew the edges back together. So it's just the opposite of actually cutting the thing, and that's why I left just that little piece there, so you can see if you ever need to sew those edges back, that's where that tool sits for that. So the other thing is, if we try to take this thing, even though we chopped off the bottom of it, and we try to unfold it, it'll do the best that it possibly can, but you can see it's going to have a lot of tension here on the corners. And while we're talking about tension, we could use this tool here. This is another display UV distortion, and it'll kind of show you where there's maybe a lot of tension. So there's a lot of tension in the entire object, which you see it turns more of this reddish kind of color. I think as it got less tension and there's less to worry about, it turns blue towards white. So I'm going to take the UVs on this. I'll run this thing again, and let's just do the unfold for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the corners on this. So I'm going to hit F10 to select my edges, or I might have to right click in here and say edge within this window like this. Let me just tap Q. It seems like I was still stuck in one of those tools, and that's what I was talking about. It becomes a little annoying. You can't actually select things because you're still stuck in that tool. So here I'm selecting these edges like this, and I can zoom in really close, and I'll cut them like this. So again, imagine we had a like a piece of cardboard or something like that. Usually it's going to have these splits already put in there, and then you could fold these flaps out on it and lay it out straight. So let's see where I'm at. I'm right here. I'll use this view. Sometimes it's easier to select in here, sometimes it's easier to select in the world. Just whatever is more convenient for you and actually getting to the pieces that you need, go ahead and use those. And I could even double click on these edges right here like that and then just cut them. And once I get all the corners done like this and split, now I'll show you what's going to happen when we use this relaxing tool thing here that we've got here. Okay, so we could use this method, and that'll give us the start. We could even go back to the unfold method that we were looking at before, and we can just turn this thing off, and we could even turn back on our checker texture and take a look there. I think that's the ultimate check, is to put this thing on here so we can actually see what a texture would look like on there. And again, the goal is to get these little squares to be nice and even as possible. And so in the past you had to move all these UVs by hand, and it was a real pain to say the least. And now they've got a lot of really nice tools that help you kind of lay this stuff out in a much more automatic kind of fashion. So I'm just going to get this here. Again, like I was saying, I'll turn this texture off now that I know that's good. And I like to you can just kind of throw this off anywhere. I just like to use a lot of space like this, because what I'm going to do is bring this thing back. Remember, we've got a lot of pieces that we've got to get UV'd and get taken care of. So we have this piece now and this piece, and you don't want these ever to be so close to each other that you can't just do something like this and grab the whole thing and just grab it as a bunch. Because now whenever we get to that last process, like I said, we're going to have to put this all on the page together, and so we'll probably have to take the pieces, you have to scale them down to get them to all fit on the page correctly like this. And then it's going to be a matter of how much Texel density do you want to have for each piece. And what does that mean, Texel density? It's saying how many pixels do you want to have per piece. So for me, in a character, I want to have more resolution on the head. So when we get to the head, that will occupy more space on this 0 to 1 page than, say, the shoulder and like the hands or whatever. So all these pieces need to have UVs done with them, but when you see at the end of this process and I lay everything out, you can kind of get an idea of who's going to get the lion's share of pixels for the map. And like I said, I want to have most of my resolution in the head just because I want that to look really, really good. Okay, so there's a little bit more about workflow with the planar mapping. Let's take a look now at cylindrical mapping. Okay, so here we've got this piece here for the arm and this piece, and really if you break it down into the most simplest shapes, they really are just nothing more than cylindrical objects. So we can use that mapping type to our advantage. We're going to go create UVs. We're going to do cylindrical mapping. We can look at the option box, but there's nothing really that big that you need to be worried about on this. So we'll just go close that and we'll go create cylindrical mapping. Okay? So it's going to look at your selection and it's going to ask you, you've got this manipulator, right? And so if you look at it, if you think about this thing kind of being a glass, it's only half the glass, right? So if we take this manipulator and close this thing up, we'll get more of a full projection around the entire thing. The other thing is the angle is not going to be matched up to the object or anything like that, so we have to click this little icon thing down here in the bottom of the manipulator, and that'll bring up our option for us to rotate. So we click this outer ring like that, and that puts us in the rotation mode where we can start rotating this thing. So again, per object, you're going to have to turn some of these options on to see like texture borders. So I'm going to turn that on, and now we can see where the split is going to happen on this. I want this to happen somewhere where it's not going to be as visible, and so that's actually a really good spot right here. And you can see as I rotate this thing around, it updates where that split is going to happen. I want it back on the back of the model here because I don't think it's going to be seen as much. Another area that I could push it to is maybe right here, and that's probably the better spot just because from this angle it's hard to see that split. From here you don't see it. Even from here there's only a few places where you actually see that split. So it's to your advantage as an artist to make sure that that split is somewhere where it's not going to be that visible. Okay, so I wish this tool worked a little bit better, and it always has these little kind of issues and these little problems, but that's not that big of a deal. We'll go ahead and leave it for where it is right now. So this is the base of what it's giving us. I'm going to select UVs for this, and I'm going to use this tool that we saw here earlier that we were working with and just have it run that thing. Here's another interesting thing. So we've got this situation where now we can start to select in this window pieces, and it might be easier for us to select them in here than it would be anywhere else. So I didn't even realize that I still had some of these faces on the inside of this thing, and I really don't need them anymore. We've got this, we've got the arm actually just inserting into this thing right here like that. So we can just go ahead and get rid of those faces just like that, and we should be good to go here. Now I did think that I snapped up everything, and I guess I missed this piece here, so everything else kind of is lining up to all the other pieces, but this was just intersecting into the arm. And I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. You know, what I probably should do is make sure that these things actually line up. I do have an edge here, here, here. So everything lines up pretty well. So it would be pretty easy to make sure that we have this thing just kind of snap together. So I'll probably do that at a later stage, but for right now, just for the UV purposes, I think we're okay for that. So the other thing is, this thing's going to lay this thing out a little bit odd because it's got to incorporate all the UV information for this, and we've got the back side of this thing, and it's trying to do its best to relax it and put it into this position where everything's working. But really what I should do is take this back piece of this thing like this and select it. We're going to cut it and get it separated from this object. Let's work our way around. Let's tap 4 just to make sure we can see everything, and you can see now we're going to cut this, and the reason we're seeing these borders the way that we are is because we're using this option here to see texture borders, and that really helps us out quite a bit. The other thing is we can just run this thing around here, double click this and split this thing off. Actually, I'm going to leave that. I'm just going to double click here from this part, hold down shift and run this part here, and I'm going to cut it like this. So I got my UVs. I'm going to start moving these things around for this shell. This is the back part, and then this is this little section right in here that we don't need. And through this I can see that I've got some things in here that I don't really need, even this geometry here. So it is possible we could select F10, go to edge, and remember I'm stuck in this tool. I have to hit Q to get out of here. Let's select this thing again. So I'll hit F10, select this. If you control right click in here, you can say to UV edge loop. That's not what I was looking for, so let's just try that again. You could do that inside of here. You can select edge loops, but really what I'm wanting to do is select the faces of here. I was thinking I might be able to do a convert selection type for something on there, and I'll select these pieces. I don't really need those, so I just want less to worry about on that. So now if we select this and we run this tool, now you can see how it's going to kind of change. And if we do the unfold, it should basically give us kind of some of the same results. The only thing that's nice about the unfold tool is that you can click and drag, and you can interactively control by clicking and dragging just how much of that thing is actually going to distort. So there might be some cases where you want this thing to not kind of fully fillet the thing out the way that it's doing. The other thing that I'll show you is this tool here. So we've got a UV Lattice Tool, and it's this one right here. So we click on that. We've looked at lattice deformation earlier in some other videos, but this basically gives you some different points to work with. And the goal for me, I know this doesn't look very good right now, but we can keep dragging a selection around this thing and using this tool, is to try to get this thing to be a bit more straight on the bottom. So you do something like this. We can even drag a marquee in a smaller section like that and get finer kind of control. And I know this is kind of breaking this rule of the computer kind of automatically figuring this stuff out for us, but it is putting our UVs in a state to where there might be some distortion on it, but it might be a little bit easier for us as artists to paint these textures inside of Photoshop at this point, because now we will have something that looks a bit more straight for some of these lines, and in in Photoshop it's going to be a lot easier for you to paint straight lines than it is going to be follow this kind of odd kind of curvature thing that's going on. So let's pull this out just a little bit like this, and again I'll tap Q to get out of that tool. So let's tap 5 and then 6 to see textures, and we'll turn this on and see what's going on here. So again, it might give a little bit of UV distortion, so we could even straighten these things up. We could select just these UVs over here, put on the scale tool. You could even scale in this direction to kind of straighten these things up. They do have some tools for straightening up edges, so say if we wanted those all to be straight here, we could do that as well. So select this bottom piece and push it down straight like that. So this, like I said, this is making it a little bit better for us to paint on, but it can cause some distortion in the model. Alright, I am going to just fix this problem where our objects don't match up real quick. So let's hit F10, control right click on here to edge loop, to edge ring and split, and we'll go around here and I'll select all the inner pieces that we don't need anymore. So I'll select the faces within here and I'll start getting rid of those like that. So we've got 2 rows of faces that we just don't need anymore. So you can see I'm selecting those in this window, and I'll get this back to 2 rows here like that, get rid of that, and here as well. And then now I can actually start snapping to these pieces here. So let's take the vert on here. Let's take a look real quick. Yes, I do have some geometry on the bottom of this. Don't need that anymore, so I'll hit F9 and then convert that to a face selection. Control F11 like that, and just hit backspace, get rid of it. Tab 5, and then hit F9 for my verts and sew these up. The reason I'm doing it now is because if I set up UVs for this thing and do this operation later, it will, after we move the model around, it's going to distort the UVs a little bit. So you can do this as a process where you kind of, maybe if you find some problems, you can fix it up, and it's not that big of a deal. It's just I'm trying to save myself some rework later on down the road. So I'll just do this real quick. It's not a big deal. And then now, whenever I start working on this object, I know that this arm here is going to match up exactly with this thing, 1 for 1 on there, so no worries on that. So the other thing is I'm just not I'm not really sold on the fact that I've got this little tiny sliver of geometry that's on the back here like this. And for me, what I would like to do, and I know this is going to completely screw up some UV stuff, I'm going to take that edge and delete it. And you can see it's going to mess some things up, but that's okay. We're going to fix this thing. So I don't want this edge either, like this, and I don't want this edge here. Now I've got these different points. I'm going to have to get rid of this stuff as well. And basically I'm just turning that into a face back there. So if I tap 5 and look at it shaded, we can see this. Let's take a look at this model all by itself. So let's go show, isolate selected, view selected. So here's what we got. This is what I was talking about. Like if we got to do some work to the model and we've got UVs going on, that can screw up the UVs. No big deal. We can keep all the UVs here. We haven't done anything to that section, but we're going to keep working on this here. So really what I want to do, I'm going to hold down shift, right click, and use the multi-cut tool, and I'm just going to split from here now. Tab G for my last tool. I'll split here. Let's go from here to here, like that, and then we'll go from here to here. And what I'm doing through this process is I'm eliminating that little lip that was just kind of living off in its own little island all by itself. And now I've got this piece here, like what we've got. This will also let me introduce to you a planar mapping option that I think comes in pretty handy at times. So I've got just these faces selected, like that. And we've looked at projection from these different axes, but you can do camera as well. So whatever I'm looking at, it's just going to project from that camera, like this. And now I can take this thing, just push it off to the side. I could even scale it down using this manipulator here. And then I'll just use this tool again. And now I can push these things and kind of rearrange this thing on the back. Because I don't really care about the backside so much, this can be even smaller, so I could just kind of stick this kind of close to this here. Remember, I'm giving enough bleed of pixels around here. You want to make sure you've got that. And then now I can just take this whole thing, maybe scale it down a little bit, and then I'll start pushing it over in here. Okay? So now we've just taken care of that object, and again, all that work was done so I can get a lip that goes around here, but I don't really want that lip in the back of this piece because we split it off, and I don't really want to have to worry about those extra little tiny polygons just floating around. So now we're going to go back to viewing everything, and we can look at these two things together. So here's another great opportunity for us to use the Cylindrical Mapping tool. And so we'll go create UVs, Cylindrical Mapping, and do that thing again, and basically go through that same process where we just do this pretty quickly. Click this manipulator here, we're going to rotate, kind of like that, and then we'll rotate at this angle. You just try to match it as best as possible. Turn on this texture border here, and again I want it to kind of match up to the border that I've already got, so I can rotate this thing, and I'll rotate it back into position just like that, and that works pretty good. So I'll hit F8 like that, and you can see that this gives us a pretty nice and straight version of this thing, so we might want to try to keep that. We could use the UV Lattice tool and try to pull this part down maybe just a little bit, and maybe try to straighten up some of these things. It's not going to be too intense, but there we go. We've got something like that, and now we've got this little tiny sliver that's off all by itself, and I would rather have that edge just go straight up like this. So if I select this thing, if we look at this, you can see how it just kind of zigzagged over there real quick like that. I just want to continue that thing up straight, so I'll cut that piece off. Take this, actually I need to hit Q to get out of that tool, and we can grow selections in here just like everything else. Shift, and I'll use that arrow key, that's really the period key, and I can move this thing over at this point. And then remember how we can sew edges together. So if we hit F10 for our edge, if you select this edge, it'll highlight also the other edge that correlates to that. So I know that edge fits together here. So I just go like this, kind of put it roughly where it needs to be, hit F10 for my edges, and then sew that together. And then now I've got something that looks a little bit better for the sleeve. So you can see how that was pretty easy to do. Now there is a little bit of distortion going on, so let's see if we ran this thing, see what we get here. It's going to kind of scrunch it up quite a bit more. And you know, like I said, we could either keep what we had before, or we could use this, and then now it would be a matter of us taking this and maybe using this lattice tool to kind of get it roughly into place. And I'm not going to be so picky with this, but you know, it's kind of up to you. If you want to, like I'm saying, if you have a stripe that's going to go across your sleeve and you want to make sure it matches up across here, it's best if you actually have these edges kind of matching up together on there. So that piece is looking pretty good, and we'll take that, and let's see, I just put on the smooth version on accident. Push it down here somewhere and scale this thing down a little bit like this. And so now we've got these pieces here, and they're working pretty good. The chest is another area that's pretty much like a cylinder. The only problem is we've got this, we're only working with one half of the model. So if we go and say create UVs and do cylindrical mapping, you see how it's going to push it on the center of this object, because we're really only working with one object. Now we can go over here to the projection center and put this to 0 for X, and then that'll get us centered up like we need. And we're only working with one half of the model like this. So we got this, and we can push it off to the side just for a second. Let's go to our UVs, and let's try this tool like this real quick. So that does things pretty quickly. The only thing is to keep in mind is that we're going to join this together with this side later, if you don't want to have overlapping UVs. If we're just sharing the UV space, this will work just fine, and that won't be an issue. You could do that, but what might be a little bit more natural for you, as you know, what you're painting, is if you actually got the two fronts of these things together. And what I mean by that is this. So if we take these, I'm going to duplicate these real quick, and get them out of here. I'm going to take this whole group and hide it just so we're looking at these objects like this. So if I take this thing and then freeze the transformations on it like this, it's a negative instance, so I'm going to have to combine these things together real quick. So I'll do mesh combine. Before I do that, I'm really worried about that tool. It makes my crash quite a bit. So I'm going to save this as a new iteration just to be careful. So let's do this, pirate model 20, like that. And now I'm going to do the combine, and I'll delete history on it. And you can see immediately when we do that, it's going to turn part of the model kind of this red color. Now because they're not joined together or anything, we can select UV on here like this, and we can use this tool, and we should be able to just separate these two shells. So we've got this piece and we've got this piece, and I'll just tap Q to get out of that tool, go to my UVs, right click on there, and now we can flip this side. And so you can see now we're good on that, right? But I need to take these two pieces and I need to join them together. So I'm going to get these points to kind of match up like this, and I'll just take these edges and I will go like this, and I will go ahead and sew them together. They don't sew together because we haven't actually sewn the model together. So if we do this, we've already looked at this before, so I'll select all these verts in here, control let's control and say we're on vertex just to make sure. So shift right click, merge vertices, give that threshold like that, and that sews together. Now we should be able to sew these edges together. It wouldn't let us sew them together because these models were separate, and so it understands that. So now we've got this. So say you're going to paint this model and you're going to have some kind of crescent or something like that, some kind of logo or something like that that's going to go on the chest. You would have to have it laid out something like this, right? So the other thing we could do is if we need the back to be together, we would have to split this thing apart. Kind of, I'm going to try to choose a spot. I think this will work pretty good here. So I'll just move all the way up through the model like this and do the same thing on the other side. So I'm just holding down shift and clicking on these edges like this, trying to split it directly up there like that. So I'll split this. We can turn this on to see our cuts, and I missed one edge, so let's cut that. And then now we can take these things, we'll move them here and here, kind of like that. And we'll go F10, have to hit Q to get out of that tool, and we'll start sewing these pieces together. Like this. So now that's a really big stretch through the back, and you can see what the kind of distortion is going to do there. Now it is possible that we could select this thing and we could select through here like this, and I believe I don't want to do this yet. I was hoping we could get to some of the tool options for this. So I think this is going to be within here in the unfold. We could go to this legacy and we could tell it to pin the UV border, and you can see how it kind of relaxes the inner parts of this thing. Now if we select this, just this part, and I want to get it here, I don't have this thing sewn together right here in the middle piece. The point that I'm trying to show you, and I don't have that vert snap together, the thing I'm trying to show you is that we can actually run this tool on just certain areas of the model. It's possible for us to do that as well. So if we do that, you can see how it's just going to hold everything else, but just because we have those verts selected, it's going to relax all the rest. It's just going to relax this part and leave all the rest alone. So maybe if I select some of these pieces, hit apply like that, you can see how we're getting there. So I know that was quite a bit of work to get there for this thing, but that's basically how you can make sure if you need to put some kind of logo, some kind of thing on the front and have it work that way, you're going to have to go through that process. So I'll do chest cover, and I'll call this front back UVs, like that for an example. And I'll just put this in the build temp group. This was leftover transform stuff, so I'll get rid of that. And I'll bring everything back. I'll have that piece hidden like this, because what we got going on right now, if we painted on this thing, if we painted, imagine you have some kind of like a griffin or something like that with a head that's painted here and its wing comes out right here. It's going to, whatever we got painted here is just going to kind of flip it on the other side. So this will make a little bit more sense whenever we start actually adding textures to the thing, but just hopefully you're starting to get maybe some idea of how some of these concepts kind of work for these things. And so I think that's going to be enough now for these different tools. We'll take a look at the head. The head's definitely something that's going to be kind of interesting. And we can try out a different mapping type for that. We'll try using the spherical mapping on that and see what that gets us. But the head's going to be quite complex because we got the eye and we got these teeth and the mouth and the jaw and everything else like that. So that's going to be something on its own. The other thing that might be a little bit tricky is maybe some of the boots. The hand is definitely tricky, so we'll have to look at that as well.